This is Mountaintop History, a podcast produced by the Thomas Jefferson Foundation at Monticello. Mountaintop History brings forward meaningful stories from this historic home and plantation, from the past and from the present. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll learn something new. I'm Chris Berry. Today, I'm joined by Monticello guide Richard Ferguson.
Today on Mountaintop History, we're going to share the story and life of Alexander von Humboldt, a Prussian scientist and thinker who met Thomas Jefferson in 1804. On May 24, 1804, just 10 days after the Lewis and Clark-led Corps of Discovery set off from St. Louis to explore the Louisiana Territory, a young and gifted Prussian polymath named Alexander von Humboldt arrived in Philadelphia. Humboldt and his companion, the French botanist Aimé Bonpland, had just finished a transformative 5-year expedition through Spanish possessions in Central and South America and the Caribbean. They had been on their way home to Europe, but changed their plans to visit the United States and meet some of the nation's leading scientists and intellectuals, including President Thomas Jefferson. Humboldt and Jefferson did, in fact, meet, and they began a friendship that reflected their shared scientific interests in the physical and natural world and faith in American democracy. Their friendship lasted until the end of Jefferson's life in 1826.
The scientist, explorer, naturalist, and geographer Alexander von Humboldt is perhaps not very well known today. However, from handling live electric eels to surviving earthquakes to climbing the formidable Mount Chimborazo, the accounts of his explorations often read like epic tales of adventure. It was through his explorations and observations, however, that Humboldt developed radical theories about the interconnectedness of nature that are both well accepted and influential today. Humboldt posited the idea of the, quote, web of life. Pull one thread and perhaps the whole tapestry would unravel. He observed the connection between human activity and climate change, noting deforestation's terrible impact on South American grasslands. He witnessed the loss of oyster beds that resulted from the overfishing of pearls. He made the connection between climate and global patterns of vegetation, observing and terming isotherms and the interrelatedness of weather patterns.
Who was this extraordinary individual who left such an indelible mark on both his world and our own? Friedrich Wilhelm Heinrich Alexander von Humboldt was born into a wealthy aristocratic Prussian family in 1769. Always curious about the natural world, he often spent hours roaming through the woods as a boy and young man, and eventually trained as a geologist and mine inspector. When his parents died, Humboldt became independently wealthy and used his fortune to fund his scientific explorations. Despite his aristocratic upbringing, Humboldt believed in political equality, individual freedom, and democracy, Enlightenment ideas that were central to the new American Republic for people like Thomas Jefferson. As Humboldt traveled 4 continents over his lifetime, monarchs and dictators like Napoleon restricted his freedom of movement and the diffusion of knowledge. Like Jefferson, Humboldt believed knowledge was necessary for liberty and for the benefit of everyone, not the property of governments. He believed in a republic of letters.
How then did the lives of Humboldt and Jefferson intersect in the spring of 1804? It was nearing the culmination of his landmark expedition to explore the Spanish holdings in New Spain, present-day Mexico, when Humboldt learned of the Louisiana Purchase and the Corps of Discovery mission. While he first thought to join the Lewis and Clark expedition, Humboldt set his sights on meeting the, quote, philosopher magistrate who is admired on 2 continents, Thomas Jefferson. In adding the U.S. to his trip, Humboldt, quote, could not resist the moral interest of seeing the United States and benefiting from the consoling nature of a people who know how to appreciate the precious gift of liberty. Upon arriving in Philadelphia, Alexander von Humboldt met with leading scientists, including famed painter and scientist Charles Willson Peele. Keen to share his discoveries, he wrote to Jefferson on the same day, quote, I have the pleasant duty of paying my respect to you and testifying to the great admiration your writing, actions, and breadth of ideas have inspired in me since childhood.
In response, Jefferson quickly extended an invitation, seizing the opportunity Humboldt offered. Quote, The countries you have visited are those least known and most interesting, and a lively desire will be felt generally to receive the information you will be able to give. A few days later, Alexander von Humboldt traveled to Washington, D.C., and eventually the President's house with Charles Willson Peele. While Jefferson and Humboldt did not leave an account of their meeting in Washington, D.C., Peele left an account in his diary. According to Peele, the dinner party with Humboldt featured no talking of politics, but rather science, travel, and culture. Perhaps, during these conversations about science and travel, they turned to Humboldt's travels around the Americas and the Caribbean.
In addition to their love of American democracy, both men shared the idea that this quote-unquote new world had the power to elevate the human condition. Jefferson had espoused these ideas in his notes on the state of Virginia, with which Humboldt was very familiar. In part, Jefferson had hoped to counter European claims that the New World, both in natural and man-made monuments, was inferior. Humboldt's discoveries served to elevate and magnify Jefferson's own observations and claims, which became defining components of American cultural identity.
From a geopolitical and strategic standpoint, however, Humboldt had something very concrete to offer Jefferson and the new American Republic: a map. Shortly after their meeting, Thomas Jefferson formally requested information from Humboldt on, quote, the question of limits of Louisiana between Spain and the U.S. Humboldt offered his entire report to Jefferson, the same one he would present to the King of Spain, who had allowed him to make the journey. The map Humboldt shared with Jefferson detailed his recent explorations of New Spain. This information provided Jefferson with negotiating power and the ability to establish borders based on accurate information of Spanish possessions south of and within the Louisiana Purchase. While granting Humboldt permission to travel, the Spanish crown hoped to reclaim territories held by France in the New World.
Which begs the question, how did Humboldt view the institution of slavery in America? Here is where Humboldt and Jefferson differed greatly. Like Jefferson, Humboldt was a lifelong champion of American democracy. After his visit to America, he spent the rest of his life meeting with and maintaining correspondence with numerous illustrious American political movers and shakers. Not only did he believe in political equality, but he also believed in racial equality. He was a staunch, lifelong abolitionist. He argued against the idea of biological race, and in his work Cosmos, he wrote, quote, all are alike designed for freedom.
He never confronted Jefferson directly, but familiar with the legal realities of slavery in the United States, Humboldt sent Jefferson reports that included discussions of slavery and strategically directed correspondence to those within Jefferson's circles, such as Albert Gallatin and William Thornton. In one letter to Thornton, who was then serving as the architect of the Capitol, Humboldt wrote, using archaic language that we wouldn't use today, quote, the abominable law that permits the importation of Negroes to South Carolina is a disgrace for a state in which I know many level-headed people to live.
While Humboldt and his holistic approach to science were eclipsed by the more rigid, disciplined approach of later scientists such as Darwin, in the immediate years following his trip to the Western Hemisphere, Humboldt left a significant mark on American culture. He inspired the likes of James Fenimore Cooper and Washington Irving, who connected American identity to American landscape. He inspired American transcendentalists such as Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and romantic landscape painters such as Frederick Church.
In today's world of climate change and ecological disaster, Humboldt's work and holistic approach take on increased significance. In his lifetime, Humboldt's discoveries and his 36 published books made him one of the most famous public figures of his day. His most influential work from 1845, Cosmos, a sketch of the physical description of the universe, inspired and continues to inspire people around the world.
This has been another episode of Mountaintop History, a production of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation at Monticello. Join us for new episodes every 2 weeks on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and the Virginia Audio Collective. To learn more about Monticello, or to plan your next trip, visit us online at monticello.org.